School bully puts hands on the wrong black girl. What happens next? Shocks everyone. The bell echoed through the polished marble halls of Halbrook Preparatory School, marking the end of third period. It was the kind of school that prided itself on tradition. High ceilings, grand staircases, and portraits of long-dead benefactors watching over students as they hustled to their next class. The scent of floor wax, paper, and cafeteria pizza filled the air, blending with the soft hum of 100 conversations. Students flooded the corridor like a river, laughing, teasing, comparing notes. Laughter bounced off lockers. Sneakers squeaked against the tiles. It was the everyday rhythm of Halbrook. Among the crowd moved Zaria Blake. She walked alone, not because she was disliked, but because she chose to. A slender girl with brown skin, striking eyes, and thick coils pulled into a neat puff, Zaria moved like a shadow, graceful, quiet, never drawing attention. Her navy blue uniform blazer was crisp, her shoes spotless, and her headphones always in. She carried her books close to her chest as if they were armor. Her gaze stayed forward, focused, calm. Most people at Halbrook barely noticed her. She didn't sit at the popular tables in the cafeteria or raise her hand in class. But if you paid close attention, you'd notice something different about her. A certain steadiness in how she walked, a subtle awareness in her eyes, like someone who saw more than she let on. But even music, soft, rhythmic, grounding, couldn't drown out the unmistakable voice of Troy Maddox. Yo, look who it is, the Queen of Quiet. Zaria's steps slowed. Troy Maddox was everything she avoided, loud, cocky, and spoiled. 6 feet of arrogance with a Letterman jacket 2 sizes too big for his ego. Son of the school board's vice president, star wide receiver on the football team. The kind of guy teachers excused and students tolerated. Not because they liked him, most didn't, but because resisting Troy meant drawing fire. And fire from Troy came with a crowd. He strutted toward her now, flanked by his usual crew, laughing hyenas who never had a joke of their own. Troy's eyes gleamed like he was about to perform for an audience. "What's up, Silent Storm?" He grinned, stepping directly in front of her locker, blocking her path. "You ever think about talking, or are you just too good for the rest of us?" Zaria didn't react right away. She calmly paused her music and pulled out one earbud, looking up at him with the kind of expression that wasn't angry, but piercing, measured. Her gaze held no fear, just quiet warning. Troy wasn't used to that. He thrived on reactions, nervous laughter, forced smiles, flinching. But Zaria gave him nothing. That only made him push further. "Yo, I'm talking to you," he said louder, his voice rising over the chatter of the hallway. Then, with a smug smirk, he reached out and shoved her shoulder. It wasn't hard enough to knock her over, but enough to make a statement, enough to draw eyes. Zaria stumbled a step back, but quickly steadied herself. The hallway changed. Laughter stopped. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A ripple passed through the crowd. Students turned, their eyes wide, phones already sliding out of pockets. They'd seen Troy bully before, but something about this moment felt different. Zaria looked at him, slow and deliberate. She took a quiet breath and squared her shoulders. "Don't do that again," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. Troy laughed, loud and dramatic, looking around like he expected applause. "Or what?" he mocked. "You gonna write a poem about it? Sit in silence until I feel bad?" That was his mistake. He thought he was still in control. But Zaria's stillness wasn't fear. It was focus. And Troy Maddox had just picked the wrong girl. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to cut with a knife. All eyes were locked on Zaria and Troy, students frozen mid-step, mouths slightly open, waiting for what would happen next. A few kids near the lockers had already pulled out their phones, sensing that something big was about to go down. Troy, still laughing, leaned forward with his chest puffed out, completely misreading the situation. He thought he had embarrassed her. He thought she'd back down like everyone else usually did. But he didn't see the shift in her eyes, the flicker of resolve, the tightening of her grip on her books just before she let them fall to the ground with a soft thud. Then everything happened at once. Zaria moved. Fast. She stepped in, fluid and controlled, pivoting her body like she'd done it 100 times. Her hand clamped down on Troy's wrist with precise force, and using his own weight and forward momentum, she turned, planted her foot, and launched him over her shoulder. It wasn't just a trip or a shove. It was a full flip. Troy's legs flew up, his body turned midair, and he landed flat on his back with a bone-jarring thud that echoed off the lockers like someone had slammed a metal door. For a second, no one moved. Then, gasps erupted. A few students screamed in surprise. Others clutched their phones tighter, scrambling to hit record in time. Some just stood there, stunned, staring at the scene in front of them. Troy Maddox, the so-called king of Halbrook, lay on the ground blinking up at the ceiling, his ego more bruised than his back. Zarya didn't even glance down at him. She calmly adjusted her hoodie sleeves, crouched to pick up her books, then straightened with the same quiet grace she always carried. Not a single word left her lips. No triumphant smirk, no dramatic pose, just silence. She slipped one earbud back in, turned, and walked away through the parted crowd, leaving behind a stunned hallway and a very humiliated Troy. By the time she reached the school courtyard, the incident had already spread like wildfire. Videos were being airdropped. Clips were posted on social media with captions like, "The fall of Troy," literally. Zarya Blake just ended the school year early, when the quiet kid's been training like a black belt this whole time. Within minutes, the school's group chats were buzzing. Memes were being made, replays of the flip looped with dramatic music. Everyone wanted to know, who was Zarya Blake? And how the hell did she just drop Halbrook's biggest bully like a sack of bricks? But Zarya? She just kept walking, headphones in, heart steady, like nothing had happened at all. By the time the final bell rang, Zarya Blake was no longer just another student at Halbrook Prep. She was a legend in the making. The moment the incident hit social media, it spread like wildfire. The original clip, shaky and recorded from someone's phone, captured the exact second Troy Maddox's world turned upside down, both figuratively and literally. Within hours, multiple versions surfaced. Slow-motion replays with dramatic orchestral music. Edits with anime fight sound effects, making it seem like Zarya had just pulled off a scene straight out of a martial arts movie. Freeze-frame memes with captions like, "And at this moment, he knew he messed up." By lunchtime, the video had surpassed 100,000 views across different platforms. Halbrook students weren't just watching it, they were analyzing it, debating it, resharing it with captions like, "This girl is a whole ninja. Troy got humbled fast. Silent Storm really hit him with a Judo 101. The entire school had shifted. Zarya walked through the halls with the same calm expression she always had, but she felt the stares. For the first time, people who had ignored her for years suddenly noticed her. Students who had barely known her name now whispered as she passed. "Yo, that's her! Is she trained? Like professionally? I heard she's been doing MMA since she was a kid." None of them were right, but Zarya didn't bother correcting the rumors. Some students, especially the ones who had been bullied before, looked at her with admiration. They weren't just impressed by what she did, they were grateful. She had done what so many of them had wanted to do but never dared. Others, however, kept their distance. They didn't know whether to respect her or be afraid of her. And Zarya? She didn't care either way. She moved through the halls with her headphones in, her head high, ignoring the new wave of attention. She didn't seek validation. She didn't gloat. She had defended herself, and that was that. But while Zarya stayed unbothered, Troy Maddox was unraveling. Troy wasn't just angry, he was livid. For years, he had been the guy no one messed with. He ruled Halbrook's social scene with confidence, charm, and, when necessary, intimidation. But now he was a joke. The worst part wasn't even the fall itself. It was the reaction. People who used to suck up to him were laughing behind his back. The football team barely looked at him without smirking. Even the teachers, who usually ignored his bad behavior, seemed to have lost the usual patience they had for him. And the memes? They were brutal. One had a still image of him midair, captioned, "Flight 101, Pilot Zarya, Passenger Troy." Another had slowed down the moment he hit the ground, adding exaggerated sound effects. The worst one? Someone had edited his fall into a WWE-style wrestling clip, with an announcer screaming, "Oh my God, he's broken in half!" It wasn't just school-wide humiliation, it was everywhere. Troy scrolled through the comments, his jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. "Damn, bro, you let her fold you like a lawn chair. You used to be the big dog, now you the puppy. How you gonna show your face after this, my guy?" His fingers twitched over his phone screen. He wanted to respond, to clap back, but what could he say? He had lost, and everyone knew it. The whispers, the looks, the laughter, it burned inside him. Troy Maddox wasn't just embarrassed, he was plotting. Because if there was one thing he couldn't accept, it was losing. And he wasn't about to let Zaria Blake walk away from this without consequences. Troy Maddox couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, eyes glued to the ceiling, fists clenched at his sides as the moment of his humiliation played on a brutal loop in his mind. The flip, the fall, the crowd. The way people laughed, like he was a joke, like the king of Halbrook had just been dethroned by someone no one even noticed until today. It didn't matter that it was just 10 seconds. That moment had shattered his image, and the cracks were spreading fast. He threw off his covers, grabbed his phone, and opened the group chat with his crew. They responded instantly. An hour later, they were all gathered in his basement. Malcolm, Bryce, and Jaden. His inner circle, teammates, friends, enablers. The same guys who had always stood behind Troy, not because they believed in him, but because being in his orbit had its perks. But now, even they were struggling to hide their smirks. "She made you look weak, bro," Malcolm said, slouched back in a beanbag chair with his feet up, straight up tossed you like a rag doll. "You gonna let that slide?" Bryce added, his voice half joking, half serious. Troy didn't answer right away. He sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet like it had personally offended him. "This is bigger than just me," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. "If I let this go, I lose everything. My rep, my place. People think I'm soft now." Jaden leaned forward, arms crossed. "So what's the move?" Troy stood up slowly. "We end it. Tomorrow. Behind the gym. No teachers, no crowd, just us and her." "Us?" Malcolm raised a brow. "You mean all of us?" "Exactly," Troy growled. "She got her little moment. Now we remind her who runs this school." There was a silence, not hesitation, more like agreement cloaked in a mix of anticipation and cruelty. "She won't see it coming," Bryce said. "And even if she does," Jaden added, "what's she gonna do? Take all four of us." Troy smirked for the first time that night. They thought they had it figured out. They thought it would be clean, simple, and satisfying. A quiet ambush to undo the public embarrassment, restore balance to their broken, ego-driven universe. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Zaria Blake had been ready for this kind of thing her entire life. And the next day wouldn't go the way they planned. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the gym courtyard, painting the ground in streaks of gold and gray. Most of the students had gone home. The school was quiet, eerily so. The only sounds were the rustling of trees and the distant thud of a bouncing basketball somewhere near the back courts. Zaria Blake stood in the center of the courtyard, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her posture relaxed, but alert. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't nervous. She was just waiting. She'd known they would come. Troy Maddox wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. The look in his eyes after she flipped him in the hallway had said it all. He'd been embarrassed, exposed, and someone like Troy didn't get even. He got revenge. Zaria wasn't afraid. She wasn't caught off guard. If anything, she had been prepared for this moment since long before Halbrook Prep. Life had taught her not to underestimate anyone, and never to let her guard down, even when things seemed calm. And right on cue, they came. Troy emerged from behind the gym building first, followed closely by Malcolm, Bryce, and Jaden, the same crew that had always shadowed him like moths to a flame. They spread out, circling her with the false confidence of boys who thought numbers were all that mattered. Zaria didn't flinch. Troy stepped forward, smirking like he was already winning. "This is where the show ends, Blake," he said, his voice low and full of venom. "No cameras, no crowd, no viral moment this time." Zaria met his gaze and dropped her backpack to the ground without a word. The sound of it hitting the concrete seemed to echo through the empty space. No threats, no speeches, just readiness. Then Malcolm charged. He was the biggest of the group, built like a linebacker, and clearly thinking his size alone would overpower her. He rushed in full speed, leading with his shoulder, no technique, just brute force. Zaria pivoted. At the last second, she stepped aside and swept his leg. Malcolm's momentum carried him straight into a metal bench. He crashed into it hard, groaning as he hit the ground. Jaden followed, swinging wild punches, his fists cutting through the air like he was in a street brawl. Zarya ducked the first swing, weaved under the second, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back. One fluid motion, and he was face first on the pavement, stunned and breathless. Bryce hesitated. His fists were up, but his eyes darted from Malcolm groaning on the ground to Jaden gasping for air. For a second, it looked like he might back out. But pride is a loud thing. He lunged. Zarya met him with a roundhouse kick straight to the ribs. The air left his lungs in a wheeze as he stumbled backward and collapsed to one knee, trying desperately to catch his breath. Only Troy was left. And now, the confidence was gone. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. He wasn't smirking anymore. Desperation had replaced arrogance. He lunged with a frustrated growl, like he could overpower her if he just wanted it enough. But Zarya had seen that kind of anger before. It wasn't power, it was panic. She caught him mid-stride, grabbed the front of his shirt, and drove her knee hard into his stomach. The air rushed out of him in a choked gasp, and his legs buckled. She let go, and he crumpled to the grass in a pathetic heap. Silence fell. The courtyard was still again, except for the sound of heavy breathing, groaning, and the distant rustle of leaves. 4 boys lay scattered across the pavement and grass. And Zarya, she stood alone, calm, unshaken, strong. She picked up her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and walked away, leaving behind the broken pride of 4 bullies who thought numbers made them powerful. They had brought 4. She only needed 1, herself. The next morning at Halbrook Prep felt different. The usual buzz of hallway gossip had shifted. Instead of the latest test scores or cafeteria drama, every conversation revolved around one name: Zarya Blake. Her story had already reached legendary status by the time she stepped through the front doors. People moved out of her way, not out of fear, but out of respect. There were no jeers, no mocking nicknames, just quiet nods, widened eyes, and a kind of silent awe that rippled through every hallway she passed. Zarya had become something more than just the girl who flipped Troy Maddox. She had become a symbol of strength, of courage, of standing up when it matters. Rumors swirled like wildfire. Some said she trained in a secret dojo outside the city. Others claimed her father was a decorated military veteran who taught her combat skills since she could walk. One theory even said she was some kind of undercover bodyguard for a government official's kid. But Zarya never confirmed or denied any of it. She just kept walking through the halls the same way she always had. Earbuds in, books pressed against her chest, calm, unshaken. And yet, everything had changed. Bullies who once laughed at others went quiet when she passed. Students who used to look through her now looked up to her. Some tried to spark small talk, others simply gave her a nod of recognition. Even the faculty noticed. Teachers who never knew her name suddenly called on her more often. One even asked her to mentor a younger student being harassed in gym class. And the principal? He called her into his office, not to lecture her, but to thank her. "Zarya," he'd said, folding his hands on his desk, "you showed remarkable restraint, discipline, and control. You defended yourself with just enough force. Not many students could have handled that the way you did." She gave a polite nod, said thank you, and left. That was all she needed. As for Troy, he avoided her like the plague. The arrogant grin was gone. So was the entourage. Whatever reputation he once had crumbled beneath the weight of his own pride and Zarya's quiet strength. And he wasn't the only one who backed off. From that day forward, no one dared lay a hand on her, speak down to her, or challenge her authority, because Zarya never asked for power. She simply earned it. Not through cruelty, not through fear, but through presence, through action, through respect. And as she walked the halls of Halbrook, head held high, music playing softly in her ears, everyone knew one thing for certain: you don't mess with Zarya Blake. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful moments like this, where the underdog rises, where bullies fall, and respect is earned, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. More epic stories are coming your way. Stay tuned.